Please give a loud and warm welcoming round of applause for Marc Scott Emery.
Thanks, that's sweet. You know, I haven't even spoken across Canada anywhere yet, so this is in a sense my first official speaking engagement since I was released from prison about 5 weeks ago. And it's nice to do it here in Dublin because my great-grandfather was from Dublin and my parents are from England, and it's the first time I've been in the Republic of Ireland or the UK, and where I continue on after we're in Ireland here. I don't just advocate the legalization of marijuana. I believe that the cannabis culture, the people of marijuana, are some of the most productive, beautiful, and important people on this planet. And I believe that what's going on against us for the last 50 years, I'll remind you that 34 million people worldwide have been arrested and charged for a marijuana offense in the last 50 years, and several million of those people went to jail. So when people sometimes come to me with the nerve to say, well, can't you talk about something really important like poverty or housing or this sort of thing, I say there is no greater, more colossal injustice on this planet than the war against the marijuana people. The marijuana people have contributed more to society than any other identifiable group, in my opinion, in the last 50 years. All the great music we enjoy today is produced virtually exclusively from marijuana people, whether it's the Beatles, Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, hip-hop, jazz, blues, country, western music, you name it. Every one of those major stars has smoked marijuana and drawn significant inspiration from it. It's true with science. Carl Sagan, businessmen, Richard Branson, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates all started out as marijuana smokers. Everywhere you look, from architecture to film to books, you see marijuana consumers producing great works and making great contributions to mankind. And yet we are spited by virtually every society in the world. Every political establishment tries to contain us, tries to stigmatize us, tries to demonize us, tries to lock us up, tries to jail us, tries to take our children away, tries to take our businesses away, tries to take our liberty away. I have been arrested 28 times for marijuana-related offenses, but never have I been arrested for even selling marijuana or growing marijuana. I have been arrested for selling seeds. I have been arrested for giving marijuana away. I've spent 3 months in jail just for passing one joint to a 22-year-old at a rally after I spoke at a university. And I've spent 5 years in a U.S. federal prison for distributing seeds to Americans. In a giant and successful fundraising scheme, I gave away $5 million over a 10-year period to provide money for ballot initiatives in Washington, D.C., in Colorado in 2000, in Arizona in 2000, in Alaska in 2000, 2002, 2004. I spent a lot of money suing the U.S. federal government in class action suits, trying to get marijuana back on the compassionate use schedule. I have financed political parties around the world, in Israel, in New Zealand, in rallies around the world, in London, in Paris, and certainly in Canada and the United States, $5 million. And this is all known and acknowledged by the DEA, who, when I was arrested in 2005, and ultimately I spent 5 years in jail, they acknowledged that they arrested me because of my legalization activities. It's quite a spectacular document that the head of the DEA released on the date of my arrest on July 29, 2005, stating that Mr. Emery gave hundreds of thousands of dollars of money to legalization groups, and now those legalization groups have one less pot of money to get, from Marc Emery. And they were quite boastful about how they'd struck a significant blow to the legalization movement. And yet, while I was in prison, Colorado and Washington State legalized marijuana, and Uruguay has in place a system coming up shortly to legalize marijuana. And so around the world, yesterday I spoke with a woman from the island of St. Lucia who's trying to legalize marijuana in St. Lucia. There are activist groups in virtually every country, island, city, state, place on earth. Someone is trying to legalize marijuana. The marijuana people have an unusual distinction in, when I was on radio today, they brought up, people can drink alcohol in moderate amounts. And I thought, yes, but you know what? You can't use alcohol for anything medicinal. You can't use cigarettes for anything medicinal. You can't use sugar for anything medicinal. You can't use most things for medicinal, and yet marijuana has dozens of tremendous applications. I have seen people with epilepsy stop suffering. I have seen people with multiple sclerosis stop suffering once they use marijuana. I have seen so many different crippled up people using marijuana as a panacea for the terrible pain they're in. And there's nothing else really like that. Even every prescription drug out there doesn't really cure anybody. It just sort of makes them cope better, and then there's a pile of side effects to them. And this is distributed by doctors every day. So all around us, we're surrounded by killers that are legal, from tobacco and alcohol certainly, but sugar, aspirin kills hundreds of people in the UK and Ireland every year. Sesame seeds will kill some people. Peanuts kill some people. We've even had water tainted in Canada that killed people. Even water will kill you. But I know marijuana will never kill you, and has never killed anybody, and has no lethal dosage level. There's just simply no amount of marijuana you could smoke that would kill you. Now, you can consume an awful lot, and you will get very dizzy, and you may even vomit. But the next morning, you'll be fine. And that's the extent of it. That's the worst I've ever seen. I will tell you, I saw a partner of mine at one time. I gave her a brownie that people had given to us. She felt terrible, was on the floor in the fetal position, said, "Oh, I feel like I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die." And she said, "How long has it been?" I said, "It's been about 5 minutes." It's been about 5 minutes. She said, "No, can't be. But I sympathized with her. I just said, "Listen, you're going to have to go to bed, go to sleep. In the morning, you'll be fine." And sure enough, that was true. That's the worst that an excessive amount, an overdose of marijuana is going to do to anybody. And yet, 34 million people worldwide arrested in the last 50 years since 1963. It's spectacular in its scope that everywhere on earth we are hunted down like dogs and like animals. And that is why I have dedicated my life really to breaking these bad laws in Canada wherever I have been able to. I have been arrested, as I said, 28 times and jailed 23 times, but I have been arrested in 7 out of 10 Canadian provinces, and I have been arrested under almost every kind of circumstances, but mostly a deliberate provocation. And I think that we have a heritage of the cannabis culture that is well worth advancing and well worth protecting, and my message is this, is that it is not a thing you want to wait long for. Every day, it's an injustice against us when the state, the Republic of Ireland, or the Dominion of Canada, I'm not sure we're still a Dominion, actually, that's an old term. I'm that old that I remember when we used to say the Dominion of Canada. We're probably like an independent member of the Commonwealth now. But nonetheless, it's illegal in both countries, and it's completely unacceptable and intolerable. And it's really a bigotry. You know, the politicians who support prohibition are supporting organized crime. They are literally manufacturing crime in a way that wouldn't exist unless these laws were. It's a colossal when you think about it. They've been elected to government, and using the veil that they are protecting the children, they have created a fabulous public safety threat of really substantial proportions. Gangs that handle the marijuana, that conduct this business with violence. One of the things I said on radio today that I think is so profound when we talk about children, they talk about, oh, well, we can't send a message to the children that that marijuana is okay. Consider the message that governments today do send. By producing legislation that is prohibition, they have said here's a typical example of a group of 16-year-olds. They're all working at McDonald's or local restaurant or a cafe, working for minimum wage, probably just barely making things work when they're 16, 17. And in walks someone in their social circle who's got some great sneakers on, some great clothes, a couple of girls on his arm, a nice car, and nice clothes. And all of a sudden they go, wow, where did you get that? Well, I'm dealing drugs, I'm selling weed, or I'm doing whatever. And all of a sudden that entirely corrupts the entire social peer group. Because we live in a very material world, and as long as everybody's kind of equal and working at these minimum wage jobs, everybody's ambitions material are quite limited. But when you see someone who's selling drugs, and you're a 16, 17-year-old, and you're thinking, boy, I would love to have those clothes, I'd love to have those girls, I'd love to have that car, I'd love to have that money, that style of life, that glamour that hip-hop records and all these things tend to perpetuate, it immediately occurs to them that I should sell drugs too. I should get involved with a gang. I should get involved with this lucrative exchange. And young people don't necessarily think of the consequences. All they're doing is thinking of the immediate short-term gain. I want to be like that. And all that kind of dangerous one-upmanship materially is rooted in the prohibition laws. It's very normal for young people to experiment with drugs. It's very normal for them to want material things. What we have to do is create an environment by which, if they're going to experiment, they experiment with knowledge, with transparency, with safety, with supervision of people like myself, I would like to think, who have knowledge and experience in these areas and will guide them through the experience so that there's no harm done. None of that can happen in an illegal environment. None of that can happen in a prohibitionist environment. When I started in 1990 as an activist, Canada was in a very bad position in this way. By 1967, every head shop in Canada had been put out of business, and all books and magazines about marijuana had been banned. In fact, a book I looked for when I became aware of this was, for my generation, a very seminal work called The Emperor Wears No Clothes by Jack Herrera, who's kind of a mentor of mine. I knew Jack before he died, and he wrote this wonderful book, and he talked about the hidden history of cannabis, and it's something actually we all take for granted now, that cannabis has tremendous medicinal uses and was used in both world wars to make parachutes and rope, and that all the great navies of Britain and France and Russia use cannabis hemp for their sails and their rigging, and cannabis has an illustrious history going back 3,000 years, all these different things. But believe me, in 1990, almost nobody knew about them. It had been buried. And this book came out, this American book, and it was unavailable in Canada. And I went to some bookshops, and I said, why is this book not available? And they said, well, we don't handle that book because it's banned. And I did not think that any such book, any kind of book, was banned in Canada. It was news to me that Canada had banned books. That seemed like an affront to me. In a democratic society, we have a Charter of Rights, a Constitution, that only came in 1982, guaranteeing us freedom of thought and freedom of association. And yet here was a book 8 years later that was all about the secret history of marijuana, and it was banned. So I went and I bought this book, and I sold it, and I bought an advertisement in the newspaper, and I dared the police to come arrest me. And when they didn't come arrest me that time, I got more things. I got marijuana grow guides of all different kinds, and back issues of High Times, and every kind of book about marijuana I could think of. And we had lineups around the block whenever I had these books and advertised them, but the police did not charge us. Eventually, 4 years later, we finally got charged. A friend of mine who got charged for disseminating illicit drug literature, as it was called. And the interesting thing about that is that possessing marijuana in Canada can get you up to 6 months in jail, and it can get you up to a $2,000 fine. But actually selling a book about marijuana was also up to 6 months in jail, but up to a $100,000 fine. 50 times greater in amount for the dissemination of essentially true facts than it would be to actually possess the marijuana. And that told me a very important thing that to this day has remained important to me. Governments do not fear marijuana. They fear the truth about marijuana. And that is what they try to suppress at every instance. The first way they suppress the truth about marijuana is they never discuss it. I have never had in 25 years a debate with a sitting politician who can justify to me the prohibition of marijuana. Because there is absolutely no public benefit. The public has never had a benefit in the 70, 80 years we've had prohibition in Canada, and Ireland has had prohibition of marijuana in the same period, and there is no public benefit. The street's safety is threatened and imperiled by gangs. Young people are lured into selling drugs. The cost of marijuana is outrageously high compared to what it should be in a legal environment. We're spending all of our hard-earned treasure on something that's as easy to grow as cucumbers and tomatoes. I'm sorry if I've offended any growers who think they're a genius. But essentially, marijuana, my fantasy, and I'm a capitalist, by the way, and part of my program was to teach cannabis people how to go into business, because I believe that the most successful route to liberty is we need to earn lots of money so we can spend lots of money to help legalize this plant. Money is the lubricant of liberty. Politics requires money, commitment, dedication, and some brave souls to go and make a martyr of themselves. Now, you may have heard that on this patch of land over the last 50 years in reference to some other things that were probably less honorable. But marijuana legalization, marijuana normalization, marijuana liberation is perhaps the most honorable crusade I think anyone could do. So I've kind of in the last, I'm an acolyte of a writer named Ayn Rand, She's a Russian-American who preaches about capitalism and individual rights. And when I read that in 1979, all her works, I said, well, this is for me. This is what I want to do. I want to be the hero in my own movie, and I'm going to dedicate my life to doing something important. And it doesn't matter how much I go to jail or how often I go to jail, or for as long as one day, even after I'm dead, there'll be millions of people worldwide who are no longer stigmatized, no longer put in jail, no longer having their children taken away from them. This happens everywhere. People lose their children because, oh, you smoke marijuana, this is not a good place to bring up children, we'll take your children away. Or even people who grow marijuana, the state says, oh, it's unsafe for your children to be around all those plants. Since when? Since both Ireland and Canada were founded as agricultural societies, are children endangered by the existence of growing plants, whether in the home or out of the home? It's fantastic that the state that has stigmatized us, demonized us, arrested us for years, even in Canada we've had 2 million people arrested in the last 45 years. I suspect Ireland approaches close to 1 million people over the last 40, 50 years arrested too. And again, there is no public benefit to prohibition, and they never state that there is. They always say some mumbo-jumbo, some vague nebulous thing that has no meaning, like, oh, we don't want to send a bad message to the children. Let me tell the politicians of Ireland and Canada this: children don't vote. Adults vote. Every law that is passed is meant for adults. No law applies to children. Children in some ways are exempt from laws. That's why they have parents. The parents guide them. And then when you're of a certain age, you are politically a viable entity. And for those people, the laws that are passed, it applies. So this business about protecting the children is completely specious, irrelevant, and a crazy argument. First of all, pot prohibition makes it much worse for the children. I happen to be a believer that if you're going to tell your kids to do anything, tell them to smoke pot. I'm not even concerned with what age they might do. All I know is every alternative is vastly worse. You know, alcohol is worse, tobacco is worse, every prescription drug is far more dangerous than marijuana ever could be. You know, most things they eat and put in their mouth when they're teenagers are terrible for them. The Big Macs they sell at McDonald's in America and Canada, the sugar that's in most every processed food. Most of the supermarkets are full of poisonous garbage when it gets down to it. It's all bad for you. Marijuana is probably the only substance on earth that doesn't kill you in any quantity. You can't say that about everything. I once have a 15 times paradigm. Before I rally once, I told people I'd smoked 15 joints in the previous 2 hours. And I told them that because you wouldn't know I'd smoked 15 joints. But if I'd taken 15 shots of whiskey, or 15 beer, or 15 sugary drinks like cocaine, or 15 cups of coffee, can you imagine? 15 cups of coffee, especially the coffee in Europe, which is so strong. 15 of those, or 15 Big Macs. Can you imagine how disgusting and horrible I'd feel? I'd be like, nauseous at the thought of 15. 15 of almost anything. Even 15 apples will give you indigestion because of the enzymes and the acids in it. 15 cups of tea has way too much acid for the human body. So 15 of anything is going to really hurt you, and it'll be visible, except smoking marijuana. 15 joints will not, as a rule, incapacitate anybody. Yeah. And maybe that's me. Maybe that's me. Okay. Okay. But I had just gotten out of prison for 4.5 years, and within days I was smoking 15 joints, and I didn't feel any negative effects, and I never have felt any negative effects. So I went without smoking marijuana for 4.5 years in prison because the punishment in prison is just too amazing and horrible that it didn't interest me. I didn't actually even want to get high in prison. I wanted to get high as a free man, and I did within an hour after being released. I was smoking and I was feeling like a free man. To me, marijuana smells like freedom. Whenever there's marijuana in the room, it's free men and women behaving like free men and women as adults who ought to be allowed to smoke marijuana. It feels like freedom when you smoke marijuana. And being an adult on this planet is all about freedom, and all about exercising that freedom and finding out the responsibilities inherent in that freedom. And when we don't have freedom, I think we should feel obligated to get out there. And I don't mean go to jail as victims. I always hear people saying, oh, so-and-so was arrested or I got busted. I don't like hearing stories about people getting busted as victims. We should be getting arrested as warriors. We should be giving notices to the political establishment, to the Guardia, to the police, and we should be saying, I will be here on this day, and I will have a cannabis plant in my hand, and it's going to be 3 feet tall, and it's going to be a beautiful thing, and I'm going to sit in the halls of power, or sit in the front door of the Parliament, or I'm going to sit in the front door of the House of Commons, or wherever you happen to be in the world, and I'm going to sit there. And if you don't arrest me, that's fine. Then next week we're going to come back and there'll be 3 of us and we'll all have a plant until you begin to see some sense, or you arrest me so I can go to court and make an explanation to the judges to how this is completely unjust and a contradiction of the Constitution of either Ireland or Canada or wherever people happen to be. And it's punishing work, I'll tell you that. I don't necessarily have a pleasant time in all the jails I've been to. I can't say I've had a pleasant time. But I don't regret any of it. I don't feel bad for any of it. I didn't have anything that has traumatized me to this day. And I did meet a lot of interesting people who are marginalized by society. And you learn a lot about your society by seeing the people in jail. I mean, in the United States, I was surrounded by this extraordinary number of black people who were given life imprisonment without parole for selling cocaine, or a lot of white guys who were getting 10, 20 years for interstate transportation of marijuana. Shocking, draconian consequences in the United States, but also in Canada too. I mean, I went to jail for 3 months for passing 1 joint in Canada. So it happens even in so-called civilized places. And there's no reason for this. We've let this go on for 45 years. And we've got to ask, well, why has that happened? Why do we not have the political clout to make this happen? And it's because we've gone to jail as victims and not as warriors. And I'm hoping that my example can inspire you with others to come up with a plan to confront the halls of power and of legislation and the politicians and force the issue on them. You've got to force the issue on them. Given their druthers, they would pretend to be ignorant. They would pretend to be ignorant that their prohibition doesn't cause problems, and that it is, in fact, the sole source of all the problems. Everything to do with drugs and its harm is not about the drug itself. It's about the prohibition of drugs. I'd say cannabis and all drugs. Human beings will abuse drugs, but no individual can abuse a drug that has the effect that the abuse politicians put on the public through prohibition. It's simply not possible. At least when a person is a heroin addict and they're abusing themselves, in a legal environment they wouldn't have to steal, for one thing. In a legal environment they could go seek help without a stigma. In a legal environment they're likely not going to die because they know that the dose they're getting. All those things are only possible when we normalize people's interaction with substances. And right now, we tend to be very addicted to many dangerous substances. I mean, in the Examiner today, there's a full page about how sugar is really white poison, they called it. But it's everywhere. It's everywhere. Poison is everywhere, and everything you buy and eat, from the coffee we drink to all the processed foods in the supermarket to everything our kids love to eat that we give kids. I see adults giving soda cans to kids all the time. It's like, you're killing your kid. What are you doing that? You're getting them addicted to caffeine. You're getting them addicted to sugar. There's no benefit to it, but here you are doing it, and it's all legal. People's perspectives and people's concepts in modern society are often very skewed, and it's up to us to educate them. Marijuana is a very safe thing. You should not worry if your children are smoking marijuana. You should be concerned about what they're doing always, but you do not need to fear marijuana. Marijuana will not create havoc in anyone's life. It will not create havoc on the streets. It's the prohibition that creates all these things. I hope you'll look at my life's work. There's a lot of wonderful movies. I'm glad I'm speaking to an audience that largely speaks English, because there are several movies about me that are quite entertaining and quite interesting, and there are many TV shows I've been in, and you can follow the progress of my work. And I think there's a lot to be said, because in 1990, as I said, all books and magazines in Canada about marijuana were banned, and we overturned that ban. And the government also made all bongs and pipes and head shops illegal. And when we started up when we called them hemp stores instead of head shops, called them hemp stores. And we gave a political orientation to that. And within a few years, we had hundreds of them emulating our example. In fact, I published a book, a little pamphlet, said how to open your own hemp store and start a revolution in your neighborhood. And it was very successful and went on to a great imitation. And I'm very flattered that that might ultimately be my best achievement. Is that all across Canada and the United States there are all these hemp stores selling goods and books and magazines and bongs and pipes and vaporizers and all these wonderful things that go along with the cannabis culture. And then I was able to finance the court cases in Canada that made medical marijuana legal in 1999 and 2001. And so on it's gone until now in Vancouver. By the way, it's a wonderful place. I hope every one of you get a chance to visit Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada one day. It's truly one of the most beautiful cities on earth. It's probably the most modern city you'll go to outside of Shanghai and a place like that. There's no old buildings. Dublin is full of wonderful old buildings, and Vancouver has none of that. You'll see a very modern new city on the most beautiful piece of real estate you could ever imagine in the world. But we do have 50 clubs that sell marijuana, and some under very liberal conditions, and the price has gotten very cheap. And next year we have a very pivotal election, and when I was released from prison 5 weeks ago, I was able to hijack a great deal of the conversation about the next election in Canada, because we happen to have a candidate for Prime Minister and his party, the Liberal Party of Canada, who are often the governing party, have often been the governing party in Canada, but are now an opposition party. But the leader has embraced legalization. He says, when I get elected, I will bring in a full legalization, and I will expunge all the criminal records of the 2 million people in Canada that have been arrested. And this is precisely what we've been looking for. What I've been looking for, candidly as well, is an apology from the government. I want the governments of the world to finally acknowledge that what they were doing was pursuing a senseless bigotry that had no basis in fact, that was pure hatred, that was purely to punish us for who we are, because marijuana people do not accept the status quo. We don't accept things as they are. We question the religious authority. We question the authority of the state. We are always questioning why. Because that's what pot does, and that's why governments have never trusted us. That's why they do hate us. That's why they have punished us, because we don't go along with the system. We don't abide by their rules. We have our own rules because we have enlightenment that comes from marijuana, and we have a culture, and we have a basis of our reality that is different from theirs. And that is why they despise us, and that is why they have always opposed us. It's based in a horrible bigotry, and that we have an opportunity in Canada next year to deal with. And my wife, I'm really grateful to say, has done a wonderful job pursuing a nomination for the Liberal Party of Canada in a neighborhood right beside ours called Vancouver East. And it looks like she might get this nomination. Now, they're very nervous about that. All the parties are nervous about that. Jody has been covered extensively in the media, even though she hasn't even got the nomination yet. Even the leader of the Liberal Party of Canada, Justin Trudeau, is very nervous about it. He's more nervous about me than he is about Jody, because I tend to say things like, don't worry if your children are smoking marijuana. I don't like ever to think that marijuana is a vice. I don't believe it's a vice. I believe it's a gift. I believe it's a blessing. I believe that if you smoke marijuana, your life will be better. If it's not better, why are you smoking it? Right? I believe that it's a gift, and yet the Liberal Party of Canada leader is even phrasing it, well, we need to protect the children, so in order to do so, we need to legalize it. Now, I'm not sure that necessarily makes a lot of sense. It does if we want to discourage people from joining gangs. It makes lots of sense there. And if we want to make the streets safer for organized crime, yes. But really, there's nothing to fear with marijuana, and I hate to be thought of that we're taking a vice. In order to make this vice more safe, we need to legalize it. No. In order to stop this hatred, this bigotry, this awful, spiteful regime of prohibition that creates in itself all the problems that are attributed to us, that's what I would say. But it's the best thing that I've ever seen a Western democracy have an opportunity to vote on. And that happens next October, and I'm hoping my wife, I'll be so proud of her if she even runs, whether she gets elected, to me is not so important. We are dedicated to supporting that Liberal Party election campaign next October. If we elect the Prime Minister Trudeau as our leader, then we're going to have the first, in my opinion, jurisdiction in the world that is fully legal. Uruguay is a very state-controlled proposal. The state is going to grow the marijuana. They're going to control its sale and distribution. I'm not sure I trust that. To me, full legalization does mean no one goes to jail, whether they grow it, sell it, or possess it. So we'll see what we get in Canada. And you don't get everything you want at first. You always have to keep fighting, and that's a good rule. In fact, I remember that when the Irish Civil War was on in 1922, it was between the extremists who wanted everything now and the pragmatists who wanted to get what they could today and worry about the rest later on when we had an opportunity to do so from a more freer perspective than we have at the moment. And that's how I think. Take whatever freedom they give you, accept it, and then move on to demand more. That's always the way in politics anyway. So we take whatever we can get, and then we demand more the day after we have that. And I hope that I'll look forward to your questions, but I hope you do check the examples of the television shows I've been on and the movies I've done, because I would love to think that we could inspire further activity in Ireland together. I would love to come back. I would love to participate in that campaign where we take a plan. Sure, I might get expelled from Ireland, but what a great way to get expelled from Ireland, right?